Netflix's documentary Quincy takes us through the life of music legend Quincy Jones. I'm Zach Laws of Gold Derby, and with me now is Jasper Leak. He is the music supervisor of this new documentary, and he just earned his first Emmy nomination in that category. So let me just start off by asking you, how does it feel to be a first-time Emmy nominee for this film?
Very exciting. Very exciting.
Well, tell us a little bit more about how you ended up getting involved with this project.
Sure. So my involvement with Quincy sort of stems from my long-standing relationship with director Al Hicks, who's an Australian film director who co-directed Quincy with Quincy's daughter, Rashida Jones. Al and I, our history can be traced back to growing up in Australia together and playing music together in various groups over the years. But long story short, Al reached out to me probably a few months before him and Rashida were moving into the editing process on Quincy, with the idea of scoring Quincy, but only using music from Quincy's pre-existing catalog. Basically, he didn't want to use any original score. He was just like, I want to, to help paint the full picture of who Quincy Jones is to an audience member. I really want to score the sort of score using only Quincy's music, and I thought that was a great idea. And so basically, that my job became I took on that job to, first of all, listen to Quincy's entire discography, catalog everything, and then make myself as useful as possible when Alan and Rashida moved into the editing process.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is the first time you've ever done a job like this before as a music supervisor. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
So what was there sort of a learning curve that you needed to go through in order to, just be able to do it?
There was. There were a few sort of technical things to get comfortable with. Growing up, playing music primarily, and in the last few years, writing and recording music primarily. Spreadsheets haven't been something that have been a sort of a consistent component of what I do. So I had to get really comfortable and incredibly organized. I just had to get incredibly comfortable and organized with spreadsheets and cataloging and tagging the discography, and working my way through that way. So yeah, in that way, it was sort of there were certain sort of aspects of the job that was uncharted territory, but really, that they were, that relatively get a handle on. The biggest task initially was just to sit there and listen to everything and get a feel for the aspects of Quincy's catalog that I wasn't familiar with at all, and yeah, organize everything basically.
So tell us a little bit about the music of Quincy Jones. For people who might not be readily familiar with it, talk a bit about just sort of his influence on music in general, and what you kind of picked and choose from.
I'd love to. So before I started on the project, I was familiar with, I think, parts of Quincy's discography that a lot of people are familiar with. His work as a big band director, his work with Frank Sinatra, and his work with Michael Jackson. What I didn't fully appreciate until I actually started working on the project was just how prolific Quincy was, has been, how many careers he had in different capacities in the music industry, but then also just how, if you really sort of look at 20th century American music or 20th century American popular music, whether it was, roots of rock and roll with Louis Jordan and Big Maybelle and Little Richard, moving into, jazz and looking at the jazz greats like Lionel Hampton and Dizzy Gillespie, Billy Eckstine, the list goes on. If you actually take a close look, you realize that Quincy was there. Quincy played such a significant role in creating what really became, in my opinion, cornerstones of 20th century music in America. So I'd say that was one of the biggest sort of things that I took away from the process of just listening to Quincy, and in answer to your question, determining who Quincy really is, and just how influential he has been as a composer, as a producer, as an arranger, as a trumpet player, and then later on, of course, as a humanitarian.
Yeah, I mean, and not for nothing, he was also somebody who, among the many things that he helped revolutionize film scoring.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, his film scores. Yeah, I mean, even it, and within every industry, within every category, the scope of the work is so tremendous. Like I was actually saying just to somebody yesterday that I think I would have been so satisfied just to have his career, the career that he had as a jazz trumpet player. I would have. I think anybody would, be incredibly satisfied to have had the career that he had as a TV composer, as a film composer, as a producer. I mean, yeah. I mean, honestly, it's a little overwhelming when you really start to sort of appreciate just the scope of his work over the years.
I have to wonder then, I mean, how many different goes did you have at like certain scenes of just trying to find the right piece of music to fit for the scene? I mean, were there some obvious choices? Were there some less obvious choices?
There were. I mean, my job ultimately was to be as useful as I possibly could be. But when Alan Rashida had, a typical situation would be, they'd come to me and they'd say, okay, we're cutting this scene. The scene is set in, it's the 50s. Quincy's just arrived in New York. The footage that we have is black and white. It's quite fast paced. We want something that feels really sort of gritty, but with a lot of momentum, that sort of is in step with the tone of the scene that we're cutting at the time. And so, and so then I would basically go and create a short list of pieces for them to work with. Usually I would give them a list of pieces with anywhere between 5 and 10, with anywhere between 5 and 10 options. And within those options, honestly, like every option was always great. But it really just came down to which one they sort of, which one they felt fit the best, or that we agreed on fit the best for the scene.
I have to wonder, I mean, working with Rashida Jones, who is, of course, Quincy's daughter, this is such a personal story for her, and Alan Hicks as well, the director who you've known for so long. I mean, what was that collaboration sort of like?
It was an honor, to be honest. My entire involvement in the project has really felt like that. I felt incredibly fortunate to find myself in the position that I did right from the very beginning, and I felt an overwhelming sense of responsibility as well to take that job incredibly seriously and do the best job that I possibly could. When it came to working with Alan Rashida, I think the key to the success that we had was the level of trust that I felt from them right from the beginning. I never got that feeling from them of like, who's this guy? Like, is he really qualified or anything like that? I mean, I think probably because Al and I have such a long-standing friendship and that we've worked together in different capacities over the years, I think that it was just understood that we were on the same page aesthetically right from the beginning, and just having been brought into the project in the right way, introduced to Rashida in that way through Al and also through the producer Paul Dupree-Pesman. I'd say that I just felt that level of trust there from the beginning, and which I'd say actually maybe made everything really possible throughout the whole process.
You mentioned that there were some things you discovered in your research about Quincy that you'd never known before. I wonder if you could just talk a bit more about some of those things. Like, what was the biggest discovery that you made?
Well, I mean, one of the scenes that actually is in the movie, and it's one of my favorite scenes. It's where I mean, I was aware of the work that Quincy had done with Frank Sinatra, and I came across some of the albums that he recorded with Count Basie's orchestra. So it was, you know, Quincy directing Count Basie's orchestra, playing his arrangements with Frank Sinatra, and so that was something that those were some records that I came across that in the discography that I had been aware of previously. Live at the Sands, It Might As Well Be Swing. But I actually didn't realize that Fly Me to the Moon was the hit that it was back in the 60s, and I didn't realize that that they actually played Fly Me to the Moon from the Apollo 11 mission back to Control in Houston in 1969. So that you know, there were these like interesting kind of cool cultural moments that I didn't realize Quincy had sort of been so connected to, from sort of the moon landing. But musically, I was familiar with In Cold Blood. I'd say before I worked on this, I was familiar with the music that he did for The Adventurers with Ray Brown's orchestra that I was always a huge fan of. But I wasn't quite across a lot of his scores, which I developed a huge appreciation for. I mentioned these artists before, but I also wasn't aware of the work that he had done. Jordan, Big Maybelle, Little Richard, like people who I would sort of look at as being the originators of rock and roll in a lot of ways. I mean, I guess maybe one of the most simple ways to say is I didn't realize that he had worked with basically everybody that I grew up looking up to. Yeah. You know, like from Donny Hathaway to Ray Charles, and I mean, the list is just, I mean, the list was basically a discography of the music that I was quite sort of obsessed with as a kid. So yeah, just yeah, I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Oh, no, it does. Yeah. I mean, it is fascinating to see just how far his reach is. You know, I mean, it's sort of, it's like 6 degrees of Quincy Jones. You know, you can sort of like link every musician to either he worked with them or he inspired them in some way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you get a chance to meet him? Having
I have. Yeah. I feel very fortunate to have met him, and I'd say maybe by this stage developed a bit of a relationship with him as well. I mean, he is hard to keep up with at 85 years old. He sort of has this exuberance about him and this seeming boundless source of energy that is like maybe is the first thing that kind of hits you when you meet him. He also seems like one of those people that he's sort of like I don't know, like I've always sort of wondered how somebody can be that prolific, and then having met him, you realize that his brain just feels like it just races faster than your average person, which sort of helped explain just how much, like just it helped explain to me his output over the years. But even though he has this like razor sharp mind and this sort of seemingly boundless amount of energy, he's also very cool, you know, just very calm and incredibly warm. And I'd also say one of those people that you meet and they're just sort of unnecessarily generous as well, you know, like I feel like I imagine that so many meetings in his life, certain forms of obligations, and I guess having met him, I wasn't expecting him to be so generous with his time and his knowledge with me, but just from the bat, like off the bat, without knowing about my involvement with the project, without any of that, it was just like in a very genuine way, just really nice to meet you. And then and just happy to share anything, you know, happy to talk about anything, happy to ask any questions I had, which were, you know, numerous. Yeah, just very, very, very generous in that way too. Just very happy to sit there and talk to you for 3 hours on a couch.
Well, Jasper, thanks so much for your time. Congratulations on your Emmy nomination.
Oh, thanks very much, Zachary. Thank you.
You're welcome. And thanks to all you at home for watching. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons below, and make sure you visit us at goldderby.com for all the latest Emmy